I began in a second grade classroom at JCDS, that's Jewish Community Day School of Greater Boston. And my role in the beginning of the year had a lot to do with assistant teaching and helping individual students. And I had a lot of time to get to know the different students in the classroom. And I loved that, getting to know their strengths, their challenges, their abilities, their interests. And I knew that I wanted to keep focusing on that throughout the year whenever I could. So when it came to our research, I decided to do a child study, which is investigating, as I said, one of the children in depth. So I chose Doug. Doug's a made-up name for this presentation. But why Doug? Well, that wasn't so hard for me to choose because I can still remember when I was teaching one of my first lessons and I was working on the board, explaining something, and I heard a voice call out, "I'm bored!" Thanks, Doug. Thanks. I'll never forget that. And Doug had a lot of other activities and parts of his personality that irked me. And if he was sitting near the board, his hand would always go up and scrape along the board. It didn't matter if there was writing in the schedule or anything important on there, or just kind of go right through. And he was always on my mind. He just, whenever I left school and interacted with him. But he wasn't always off track. He also had an on-track, off-track kind of part of him. And when he was on in a very interesting way. He would take a subject matter and apply it in new ways, and something you don't usually see in second graders. So for instance, we were learning about book talk discussions, how to say, I agree with what you're saying about this, I disagree, I want to challenge that, I have a new opinion. And he would learn, the second graders were great at doing that about book discussions, wonderful thing. But he also would say, could I use this during math? Could I say during morning meeting shares, like show and tell, that I want to add on to someone's comment? And as a teacher, this was wonderful, but it was so unusual. It stood out about something about Doug really interested me, and why he would be so engaged sometimes and so unengaged other times. So my research questions that I brought during the second semester with me to the school were, what kind of a learner is Doug? What can I learn about his relationships in the classroom? And how can I improve his behavior, right, and his learning experiences? And the process I used were videos of the classroom situation that often, it turned out useful, had myself teaching and Doug in the frame also. I had journals when I would review what I had done during the day in my lessons and wrote my opinions about them. I had interviews with other school staff, and I had a specific method called the descriptive review process that I want to focus in a little more about. So the descriptive review is a process developed by Patricia Carini about a few decades ago, and her colleagues at the Prospect Center. And what they've done is try to create a collaborative, non-judgmental way to look at students. We all bring perspectives on what we're looking at through the window, and her process helps people look at things in a new way, and especially a well-rounded way. So what we did, I would observe Doug and consider him in different parts of him, consider his emotional needs, what he did physically in the classroom, his social standing and relationships, even maybe his spiritual interest. We had a prayer component at our school. And what we did in early May was, actually, I'll wait that 1 second, I just want to show you this quote. The focus of the review, which is when we actually sit down with a number of teachers together, the focus of the review doesn't have to reflect some major problem or crisis. So it's important to consider that this process is not an intervention in some way. It's really an ongoing process done in some schools for every student in the school, just to look at them in a new way. So what I did in early May was to invite his other teachers in the classroom and some of the Brandeis faculty to come together and discuss Doug. I brought my information, as I said, about his emotional, his physical, his social presence in the classroom. And my goal was to present this well-rounded opinion from myself that I thought I was seeing. What I found out was that others had very different perspectives. The fact that he put his fingers on the board didn't bother other teachers, really. They just talked to him about it or went along with it. They didn't carry it around with them after school like I did. The fact that he connected book talk language was interesting, but wasn't the same fascination with it. So it became interesting also I could just take a step back and say, you know, they're seeing this child from a different point of view. So I'm looking through this window at Doug, they're looking at this one. And that helped me start to take a different perspective on what he was doing. So fast forward a little bit, school year ends, come here to Brandeis and start doing our summer research program. And what I did then especially, and I'll show you a few slides here that look at my data, and there's going to be a lot of text, some things highlighted, but what I'm really going to be showing you is the structure that changed. So just have that in mind when I show you a couple slides about this and explain them. So the first kind of data analysis I did was combining my videos and some of my journals. So as I said, my videos had myself and Doug often in the same frame. And as I got more interested in who Doug was, I got interested in what was our relationship together and what did that mean about my teaching. So my first attempt at the data analysis, I looked at the video and I found that, I just want to highlight here, so attentive and inattentive. So that meant I had made these two categories of when Doug was attentive and inattentive. And as I brought this to my colleagues here at Brandeis, my idea of what attentive and inattentive wasn't the same thing they were seeing on the videos. Again, it was that window, looking through different windows at it. And in fact, it wasn't necessarily something I could prove in the video. If I said he was inattentive, but then he answered a question correctly later, what was I really showing in this at all? So I went back to my data. And what I did this time was uncovered some more. And I made these two columns. The left side says observations, and I tried to be much more descriptive of what I was seeing in the videos, and then interpretations, where I tried to do a better job of separating out what was my opinion, what was a layer I was adding to this. So here I highlighted, Doug says something quietly under his breath and turns his body in his chair, just getting at the idea that he did something objectively. So I had interpretations. What did I do with them? I went back to this one more time and colored the interpretation side. It became very interesting to me. And the colors here represented different things. They represented, was he following expected behaviors, which was different than attentive because we had expected behaviors in the class. So even, I wasn't now saying, was he in his mind attentive or not? I was just saying physically, and I could actually measure it, decide that. Then I had these purple ones. Does he need to be heard? Because he said something under his breath. Does he need to be heard? Is this an outlet for his ideas? This could be a clue to involve him or more students more. So I was getting more out of my own thoughts by separating them out and watching the videos again. And then the green part is, for instance here, I said response to teacher or student activity. I started noticing that what he was doing wasn't just spontaneous. It came from something someone else in the classroom did, often what I did as the teacher. And I started to really wonder about that. And that's when I started to look at what he was doing wasn't just on his own. It was coming from another event that had happened. And I started to call that the mirror. So I was not looking at him anymore. I was starting to look at what I or something else, some other context of the classroom was happening. So these two findings came together in an important way for me. When I did the descriptive review and talked to my colleagues here at Brandeis, I called that the window, the different windows about him. By discussing Doug with my colleagues, I learned that a more positive perspective on him was possible. It wasn't just the frustrations I had and the misunderstandings. I could take a step back, I could just wonder more and even worry about it a little bit less. But also there was the mirror. The analysis of my videos revealed that Doug's behavior was an understandable response to the environment. So one thing I saw a few times in the video was that Doug had his seat next to mine, usually, in the classroom. And if I asked a question to the class, I would look at everyone in a circle, look for hands up, and look for a response. Maybe I didn't see one, but sometimes I didn't see that Doug next to me was the kid with his hand up. And I didn't know that until seeing the videos and seeing it repeatedly, that I had a bias towards that side. I wasn't aware of him, and then after he had his hand up, and then I didn't call on him, then he started to fidget in his chair, and then his hand started to go over that board that was next to him. I started to see a very different story than what I had known about before the video. So it became a great piece of evidence for me of what was going on and to change my practice. And as I wondered about it, I wondered what it would have been like with just such a small difference. A small difference like me looking across the whole circle. Something different like me talking to Doug, knowing he maybe, if I thought more about how he wanted to be involved, letting him know early in the lesson, I'm going to make sure I call on you. I'm looking for your answer here. I'm looking for you to connect that kind of language here because you're so good at that. So I started to think a lot more about what it would mean to reach out to Doug and therefore to other students. And I thought about this quote from Pirkei Avot, a traditional text, the sayings of the fathers: initiate a greeting to every person. And this is something I'm reflecting on, looking forward to making more of my practice, is noticing each individual and then thinking about how to reach out to them and include them even before they start doing the things like the fidgeting and the reaching up. So a final look, a final view. I felt really lucky last night because something happened last night. After we finished in this room, we went up to the snacks. I had a good friend of mine here who has 2 daughters, and they were up here also last night. And I saw the 2 daughters go over to one of the outside doors, and they kind of were just like looking at the door and doing things. And I was like, what? I'm not sure what's going on. And because it's just like a courtyard, there's nothing going on. And I realized that they were looking at this glass door, but they weren't looking outside. Because it was dark outside, this glass door and window had become a mirror. So I realized that this windows and mirrors I was talking about actually really could happen for the same example. And so that's why I'm still thinking about this. So thank you. I welcome your comments and questions.